Welcome back to OtakuDaiKun. Dai here, and you may have already heard this, but some interesting news has blessed the anime world. Code Geass will be getting a third season, Lelouch of the Resurrection, a direct sequel to the anime's second season. This has gotten a lot of people's attention, including my own, considering that Code Geass ended on a pretty solid note, with no need to continue the story. Regardless of how you might feel, it seems we're all going to get some new development to its already dense world. Given that it's been roughly 8 years since Season 2 finished airing, I thought it'd be a great idea to go over the lore in Code Geass in the form of an overview analysis. This should help you all get up to speed with the anime, or at least the big picture, so that you can approach Season 3 with a refreshed mind. Obviously, this is meant to supplement the anime, so if you haven't seen it, do so now. Seriously, Funimation's got it for sale on Blu-ray, and I recommend it as a legendary anime. They're bringing the Akito the Exiled films to the West as well. From here on, prepare to be spoiled. Let's start with the foundation of Code Geass's world. In it, we have a world much like our own, instead filled with giant robots and some advanced military technology. However, there also exists a metaphysical dimension, known as the world of C, or C's world. Within C's world is what some refer to as God, but is more accurately described as the collective unconscious of humanity. Right off the bat, Code Geass is tossing some psychology our way. The collective unconscious was a concept coined by psychoanalyst Carl Jung to describe how all living beings share a set of common thoughts, images, symbols, and memories, while not actually being aware of it. He argued that there were certain ideas that we all possess, regardless of our life experiences. It's considered unscientific in modern psychoanalysis, but it's gotten plenty of attention within fiction. In Code Geass, the collective unconscious is essentially a force, an entity, consisting of the minds of all human beings, both living and dead. Like a deity, the collective unconscious commands the flow of time. It's responsible for the creation of two unique abilities. The first is the Code of Immortality, an ability granted to humans that makes them unable to die. The second are Geass powers, which are granted to mortals by those with codes. Geass powers are supernatural abilities that manifest in the user's eyes. They grow stronger with each use, and will often grow so powerful that their users cannot control them. If a Geass user manages to master their Geass power, they'll wind up strong enough to steal the Code of Immortality from the person who gave them their powers. In fact, this is the only way for someone possessing a code to rid themselves of it and return to being mortal. Doing so will allow a Geass user to inherit the immortality by giving up their Geass power. Admittedly, Code Geass does a lackluster job of explaining just how the codes were introduced to humanity and for what purpose they exist. All we can really do is trace their appearances within the anime. The first person, chronologically, seen to possess a Code of Immortality is a nun living during medieval times. This nun gets close to C2, who was a slave girl, simply trying to live day to day. C2 gets taken in by the nun, and given a unique Geass that would cause other people to love her. The power seemed to work, as everyone she met from then on would be utterly obsessed with her. Having grown up as a slave, C2 merely wished to be loved by another, but she quickly discovered that her Geass powers weren't really getting the job done. While she gathered the adoration and obsession of anyone she would meet, none of it felt genuine because of the Geass's coercion. As such, she was no longer happy, losing interest in her Geass. Regardless, her Geass grew so powerful that it manifested in both of her eyes. Turns out that the nun no longer desired immortality, and was counting on C2 to be able to inherit her code. She mortally wounded C2, making it so she'd have no choice but to inherit the code in order to survive. The nun died, and C2 was now immortal. She was, throughout most of her life from then on, accused of being a witch, garnering her much hate and disdain. This jaded C2, and rather than seeking the genuine love she desired, she instead yearned for death. The second sighting of a code happens much later on, involving the anime's antagonist, Charles Z. Britannia, and his brother, V2. Essentially, V2 wound up inheriting a code of his own. The anime doesn't present us with any knowledge of who he inherited it from, nor what Geass he had before taking the code. Either way, V2 and his brother Charles survived a bloody series of coups d'etats, betrayal, and backstabbing, known as the Emblem of Blood. During this time, their parents were killed, and the two boys vowed to bring an end to all the deceit plaguing the world. Turns out, being in possession of a code of immortality also grants one knowledge of C's world. This means that V2, upon inheriting his code, learned about the collective unconscious, which he reasons to be the source of all lies and deception. What's his reasoning? Well, according to another psychoanalytical theory, humans have an inherent desire to differentiate themselves from the collective, and the way we do this is by forming personae, or figurative masks we put on when interacting with others. Within the logic of Code Geass, trying to establish ourselves apart from the collective is the ultimate deception. When we present ourselves to others as individuals, we're essentially putting on a front, a lie. This is what motivates our antagonists. V2 gives his brother Charles a Geass, the ability to manipulate others' memories, and the two of them set out to essentially destroy God, to dismantle the collective unconscious. Doing so would effectively stop the flow of time and force all humans, both alive and dead, to be of a like mind. Without a collective to differentiate themselves from, humans would have no need for deception. Charles and V2's plan is to activate 8 ancient devices called thought elevators, which would activate an even greater device, a temple called the Sword of Akasha. With the active Sword of Akasha, they could instigate a process called the Ragnarok Connection, which essentially would eliminate the collective unconscious and complete their goal. Here's where Charles and V2 start to twist morality in their favor. The two of them began to see the regular world and its inhabitants as insignificant when compared to their grand ambition. As a result, they stopped caring about their fellow humans, deeming their existence as flawed and unworthy of their cause. Charles uses his Geass power to claim the Britannian throne for himself, and he uses Britannia's great military might to conquer much of the planet. This is primarily an attempt to secure all 8 thought elevators. It's also when some nasty family quarrels come into play. Charles must have been a real horn dog, having multiple wives and fathering various children. Perhaps his most beloved and understanding wife was Lady Marianne, who also served under his military as the charismatic Marianne the Flash. She eventually settled down with Charles and gave birth to both Lelouch and Nunnally. Let's go back to C2. She's been alive for centuries now, unable to die, and unable to fulfill her wish of being loved unconditionally. She's long since abandoned any hope of fulfilling that wish, and instead yearns to die by giving her code of immortality to another. During the course of history, she joined sides with Charles, particularly by sharing a friendship with Marianne. Charles now had the help of 2 codes, those belonging to V2 and C2, which was necessary to activate the Sword of Akasha. For a time, C2 and V2 worked together, experimenting with Geass powers under an organization called the Order of Geass. They secretly granted various children Geass powers to better understand them. C2, in particular, had high hopes that one of the Geass users would master their Geass and claim her code. This never came to be. Now, V2 had a rather close bond with his brother Charles, placing all his concern in their contract to defeat God. As such, he began to view Lady Marianne as a threat to their contract, because she was getting Charles attached to the material world they planned to greatly alter. V2 convinced her to lower the estate's security, and he ultimately murdered her. Well, he tried to anyway. Marianne had her own Geass, given to her by C2, and this Geass allowed her to transfer her consciousness into others. On the verge of death, Marianne used her Geass to transfer her mind into her servant, Anya, who witnessed the murder. Shit really hit the fan with this incident, as Charles had to seal off Nunnally's eyesight and tamper with her memories. He exiled her and Lelouch to Japan, supposedly for their safety. As a result of having a contract with C2, Marianne could telepathically communicate with her. Marianne told C2 that V2 had killed her, and this caused C2 to leave Britannia in disgust. We've more or less caught up with the anime's plot at this point. Charles continues to wage war against the entire world under a survival of the fittest philosophy. Part of this involved the conquest of Japan, being colonized as Area 11. Lelouch lives with Nunnally in secret for their protection. Around this time, Prince Clovis, Viceroy of Area 11, finds C2, and, having no knowledge of her code or importance, captures her, and intends to present her to Charles. During C2's transport, Lelouch encounters her and is granted his Geass power from her. With grand ambition, Lelouch sees this as an opportunity to defeat his father and put an end to Britannia's brutality, mostly for the sake of his sister. He forms the Black Knights and becomes the iconic Zero. His terrorist rebellion grows in strength, and while many Japanese fighters and innocent citizens are killed during the fighting, the Black Knights believe that they can truly liberate Japan. As Lelouch learns more about C2, they grow closer to each other, and, unknowingly, C2's wish for death starts to turn into a yearning for Lelouch to love her without coercion. The anime's first season is straightforward until Lelouch and his best friend and rival Suzaku are about to be destroyed by a Britannian airship. Marianne, whose consciousness can exist freely within the world of C, uses her power to transfer those in the blast radius to Kamine Island, where one of the thought elevators is found. Shortly afterward, Lelouch is convinced by his sister Yuffie to cooperate with the founding of the Japan Special Zone in order to establish peace. Hell breaks loose when Lelouch's Geass actually goes out of control in his left eye, and he accidentally orders Yuffie to kill all the Japanese. He's left with no choice but to murder her and continue his rebellion. He initiates the Black Rebellion as his grand attempt to liberate Japan. But V2 shows up and messes with things. He tells Suzaku about Zero's Geass power, and even kidnaps Nanali, taking her back to Kamine Island. Suzaku and Lelouch finally confront each other at Kamine Island, and Suzaku defeats Lelouch. He takes Lelouch all the way to his father Charles, and uses him as a bargaining chip to take a spot in Charles's Knights of the Round. Akito the Exiled, a series of OVA movies, takes place in between the two seasons of the original anime. They essentially chronicle Britannia's attacks on the EU, with a whole new set of characters. That said, C2, Lelouch, and Suzaku all make appearances within the OVA. Essentially, instead of killing him or anything rash, Charles uses his Geass on Lelouch to brainwash him. During this time, he uses his son and his strategic prowess to assist in military conquest. I've decided to leave Akito the Exiled out of the analysis, as it would mostly be a plot summary for the series of films that explain themselves just fine. As it turns out, Charles has known about Lelouch and his rebellion the entire time. He simply didn't care about it. Once he reasons that Lelouch got his Geass from C2, however, he had a reason to intervene. Recall that, in order to establish the Ragnarok Connection, Charles needed 2 codes. So C2 is a crucial part of his plan. Charles manipulates Lelouch's memories, and sets him up with a fabricated life in hopes of luring out C2 and capturing her. This backfires, as Lelouch still manages to reunite with C2, gain back his memories, and restart his rebellion. During this new uprising, Lelouch has more knowledge about his father and what's really going on, so he specifically targets the Order of Geass. There, he fights against V2 and actually wins. V2 dies, which makes us wonder what happened to his code. Lelouch enters the nearby thought elevator and confronts his father at the Sword of Akasha. When Lelouch thinks he's won, managing to compel Charles with his Geass, he discovers that Charles had already taken V2's code for himself, relinquishing his Geass in exchange for immortality. How did he do it? Well, Charles wound up being able to fully master his Geass, and, as such, gained the ability to steal his brother's code. This also means that he can technically fulfill C2's wish by stealing her code, which he almost does. Lelouch pleads to C2 not to surrender her code to Charles, claiming that he can fulfill her real wish, which is to be loved. To seal off her code, C2 reverts her mind back to when she was a mere slave in medieval times. Lelouch continues his rebellion until once again confronting his father at the Sword of Akasha. There, he's joined by Suzaku, C2, and his mother, Marianne, who can fully materialize within the world of C. Marianne returns C2 to normal, and tries to convince Lelouch to join them in forming the Ragnarok Connection. Lelouch rejects the idea, viewing a world without time and independence as a world without progress in humanity. So he uses his Geass to order the collective unconscious not to stop, not to submit to his father's will. In response, the collective unconscious eliminates Charles and Marianne from existence. With all of the metaphysical stuff dealt with, Lelouch and Suzaku realize that the two of them have tossed the entire world into chaos in pursuit of their ambitions. They now, after all this rivalry and conflict, decide on a plan to set the world right again. a plan they call the Zero Requiem. Essentially, the two would work together to establish Lelouch as leader of the entire world, making him off to be a complete tyrant even worse than his father. Then, in an act of pure justice, Suzaku, dressed as Zero, would publicly assassinate Lelouch in front of the entire world, so that the Republic of Nations, and all within them, could be free from tyranny, and put all their blame and hatred into Lelouch. At the very end of the anime, we're treated to a scene in which C2 is on a horse-drawn carriage, having a conversation with someone in the same way she used to speak to Marianne. This is obvious to say she's talking with Lelouch, in some form or another. This leads us to the last topic of this analysis, Lelouch's fate. Now, I, like many others, was under the impression that Lelouch had undoubtedly died when stabbed by Suzaku. In a way, it seemed like the perfect ending for the series, considering that Lelouch would have sacrificed himself to try to make up for the chaos he had caused. So what can we make of this final scene? Some believe that Lelouch had mastered his Geass and inherited C2's code of immortality. I personally doubt this, given that the only reason C2 took the code in the first place was to survive a fatal wound to the chest. Without the code, it's likely that she would die soon afterward, just like the nun who had given her Geass. At the very least, C2 would no longer be immortal. Another option is that Lelouch is legitimately dead, and his mind still exists within the world of C. Just like his mother, he would be able to communicate telepathically with C2. In order to continue the series with a third season, Lelouch will have to somehow be resurrected, hence the season's mantra. Regardless of which route the writers wind up taking, it'll certainly be interesting to see what impact Lelouch will have on the future of his world. This concludes my lore analysis of Code Geass. If you have any insights of your own, please mention them in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, please like it and share it with your friends. Go ahead and subscribe to OtakuDaiKun for more anime lists, reviews, discussions, analyses, recommendations, and Let's Plays. Until next time, celebrate your fandom.